Hello and welcome to Campaign Daily, where we bring you all of the latest on election 2016. Now, a little later, we're going to be looking at gender quotas and the impact that they could have on the next Dáil. We're also going to be hearing from the Labour Party as they launch their education manifesto. And of course, we'll have our political panel. As always, we welcome your views. You can contact us via Twitter or email. Now, last night saw the 7-way leaders' debate in Limerick. No huge gaffes, no huge victories. What impact is it all going to have? To discuss this, I'm joined now by three people who are watching it very closely. By Stephen O'Leary, social media analyst with Politico, by John Downing, political correspondent with the Irish Independent, and by our own Brian Dowling from RTÉ's political staff. Now, before I suppose we get into it, let's take a look back at some of last night's exchanges. This report from Adele McAllister.
Anticipated event as this campaign passed its midpoint, and while much of the focus was on the main party leaders, there was a strong reaction at the leaders' debate for the smaller parties.
You are being offered a false promise. You are being told, we are all being told, that we can have US taxes and European services. That is a false promise.
We welcome any job, wherever it is, as long as it's properly paid, and we don't welcome these pretend jobs or exploitative jobs where people are getting a few quid on top of their dole when they should be getting paid properly in JobsBridge schemes.
Renew leader Lucinda Creighton also drawing applause for a tougher approach to law and order.
And I think it's an absolute indictment of the political system, of the established parties, for failing to ensure that we actually apply our laws, that we have appropriate sentencing laws, and that repeat offenders who terrorise people are taken off the streets.
Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams raised a laugh when he referred to Enda Kenny, Joan Burton and Micheál Martin as the three amigos.
I think that the electorate should send the three amigos to ride off into the sunset. You should take this opportunity, let them get on their donkeys and ride off.
A robust performance from Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin, who attacked the government's record on housing.
The Labour Party and Joan Burton, as Minister for Social Welfare, reduced rent allowance and reduced the rent cap. And the bottom line is this: Focus Ireland, Simon and all the agencies at the coalface said, if you do this and if you continue with this, you will drive vulnerable families into homelessness. And what happened? It went from 12 families a month to 40 families a month to 70 families.
Taoiseach Labour leader Joan Burton in turn took issue with Fianna Fáil.
What's just come from Micheál Martin is laughable. He was in government for 15 years and he left just as the place went down in ruins. And now he's decided, it's like the emperor with no clothes, that he's able to come back here and pretend the past, Fianna Fáil's past, never happened.
While Enda Kenny stayed back from the fray, he also defended his government's record, but the question that won't go away, will they do business with Fianna Fáil?
My proposition is for the people, with respect, to consider returning the government that is in office of Fine Gael and Labour, to provide that stability, to have that strong economy, and to invest in all of the things we've been speaking about tonight.
If I can just interject.
The Fianna Fáil Party were responsible after 14 years for driving our economy off the cliff. They are not creditworthy in terms of being in government.
So no clear winner or serious mistakes as the campaign continues.
Adele McAllister reporting there on last night's 7-way leaders' debate. I suppose a lot of the talk this morning is about the three small parties, how they kind of took over the debate. But John, before we get into that, did we learn anything new last night? Did anything come out last night that we didn't know?
I think you would struggle to find anything that was new there last night. Perhaps the more general person who doesn't follow every cough and spit, may have found the odd detail there. But I think anybody with a glancing interest in politics would have found very little there. A lot of history lessons. Joan Burton saying that Micheál Martin was 15 years in government. Well, it was 13 and a half, but I suppose we wouldn't be too pedantic about the extra 18 months that she snuck in there. Heavy on history. Both Enda Kenny and Joan Burton going back over Fianna Fáil's record and how they wrecked the whole gaff in their final term. Meanwhile, Micheál Martin going back, and it may be more telling, on the last 5 years, perhaps the government, the outgoing government, should stop this history lesson. I mean, their own history is they had 5 years in power. They, as Micheál Martin rather tellingly put it, they're very, very recent, very, very blatant broken promises. So the statute of limitations for many things is 4 years.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I mean, Brian, we did go a lot to the past. There were a few moments, I thought, where Clare pushed people on what their actual policies were that were quite interesting. Gerry Adams, for example, on rural Ireland.
I think
he was pushed there.
I think in the main, the smaller party leaders did well. Gerry Adams had a performance that there was nothing spectacular in it, and Gerry Adams would have appealed to the kind of voter Sinn Féin's going to get. I'm not too sure he managed to reach much beyond that vote. And a lot of the talk about, if he uses this phrase about having a citizens' rights-based economy and what might flow from that. But when he was asked about some of the detail of that, particularly, say, rural Garda stations, how would that, if you reopened the whole 139, 140 of them, how would that enhance policing? He was stuck. Yeah. Because the question is,
as was Richard Boyd Barrett.
He talked about that people would feel more confident in their homes if you had more rural Garda stations reopened. But does that mean we get better policing? And I think he struggled to deal with that issue. And at the other end of the spectrum, Stephen Donnelly did extremely well on the big economic issues. But then when he was asked about the public sector, he spoke about talking to Gardaí and what they would need to do the job, to get the tools, nurses, doctors. But if you go into the public sector and you talk to each group and everybody gives you a wish list, at the end of the day in government, you still have to make decisions among competing demands. You can't satisfy everyone. I think he was weak on that particular issue. He was very good on other points. Likewise, Lucinda Creighton carved out for Renew Ireland a very distinctive position on crime. In some senses, maybe potentially, although it got a huge round of applause, but one that might make some people sit back and think, particularly about parents being held accountable in courts and the implications of that. But she wasn't afraid to stake out a position that was very distinctive in that regard. Richard Boyd Barrett.
And I suppose that's what a small party is looking to do, is to carve something out that they own over the course of the debate.
You're not trying to reach a big pool of people. Remember, they're aiming to consolidate a small support. Richard Boyd Barrett probably hit the most populous chords in terms of the audience reaction.
Yeah, he got the most applause,
and how he dealt with some of those issues. But again, when you get to detail in relation to crime, for instance, he was struggling as well. When you get to the policy implementation, there's a problem.
OK. Now, listen, Stephen, you're with us. You are a social media expert. You analyse what goes on social media. How overall did it play out last night? We're going to take a look at some graphics in a moment. But first, your overall impressions.
Yeah, I mean, the debate got people talking. And I think that's probably one of the only things we can say definitively. There are going to be lists of the parties who won and lost on social media. And in truth, taking into account volume, taking into account sentiment and other elements, I think it's very difficult for anybody to say a particular leader or a particular party won on Twitter or on a social network last night. Now, it is interesting that the numbers went up from the debate last week. So we had 50% more tweets sent using #LeadersDebate.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the actual numbers first, and then we'll go through it. Okay, we'll go through it rather now. On Facebook, it has 2.5 million users here in Ireland. Joan Burton was the most mentioned candidate there, followed by the Taoiseach Enda Kenny, the Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams, and Fianna Fáil's leader Micheál Martin came in fourth. Moving on to look at the parties, Fine Gael was the most mentioned by Facebook users during the debate, followed by Sinn Féin and Labour. Then if we move to Twitter, there were nearly 60,000 election or debate-related tweets between 9:30 and 11:30 last night. Social Democrat Stephen Donnelly was the most mentioned, followed by Gerry Adams, Enda Kenny, Joan Burton and Richard Boyd Barrett. Now, interesting, here with Twitter, we can look at the sentiment expressed in those tweets. It's not just mentions, it's whether they were good or bad. Stephen Donnelly recorded the highest level of positive commentary at 52%. That's the area you can see there in green. Now, finally, to get a sense of where the Twitter users who were commenting on the election and the debate were actually located yesterday, Twitter has generated this heat map. This tracks the volume of tweets throughout the day, the bright spots being the areas of most activity. And that's the time of day down below. And you can see, Stephen, there, I mean, Ireland really lighting up hugely at around the time that the debate went live.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is absolutely what we would expect.
And that's just people talking about the Irish debate now.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? The diaspora, we see it.
Absolutely, and I suppose this is the beauty of being able to watch a TV programme from anywhere in the world. And, you know, we know that there are an awful lot of Irish people who've emigrated. There's a lot of people who have an interest in what's going on here in terms of the outcome of this. I do think, though, particularly when you look, for example, at leaders that were mentioned the most, parties that were mentioned the most, that there has to be a sound of caution around this in what you can actually tell about the leaders or parties based on that. Volume should not be confused with endorsement, and often it is. Being the most talked about on a social network is not necessarily a sign that a lot of people particularly like what you did. So the sentiment helps. It definitely adds an extra layer, but even at that, to take 40,000 or 60,000 pieces of content and use an algorithm to try and assign sentiment to them, it's very nuanced. There's an awful lot of sarcasm in Ireland, amongst other things.
Yeah, and it's very difficult, I would imagine, to measure it. But I mean, the real thing about social media, it's not really about getting people to decide which way to vote, is it? It's the evidence is that it's more about getting people to vote at all.
100%. And I think if we look at the referendum last year, that was one of the biggest success stories. So an awful lot of people who have discussed the social media outcomes of the marriage referendum say, well, it had a massive impact on helping people to decide how they were going to vote. In truth, it didn't change an awful lot of minds. What it did was it managed to get an awful lot of people who probably would have been relatively passive and maybe wouldn't have gone to polling stations.
And it remains to be seen, though, whether it will have the same impact in a general election. 40 different elections taking place.
It does, and it's one of the big concerns that's being raised again and again. However, what we are seeing is, even on Twitter, photographs of young people queuing outside Garda stations looking to be put on the registered list of
It would be great to see the numbers voting going up. John, finally, we're 2 debates in at this point. No clear winner in either, really. You'd say Joan Burton was under a bit of pressure in both. The polls, we are in pretty much exactly the same place that we started. We're certainly within the margin of error. How much is there to play for now at the final debate next week?
Well, it's all to play for still. And you talked to Fine Gael, they believe they're going to get a lift. There's going to be a game changer. People are going to swing back. I'm beginning to lose faith in that idea. I was prepared to listen more to it than now. If there is to be any swing or any change, it will have to be late this week. We had the situation, some in Fine Gael talk about 2007, when Bertie Ahern's Fianna Fáil were beaten. And it was only in the final weekend that things suddenly came up roses for them over again. So certainly it is, the ball is still in play, but we may very well be at this point again on polling day.
Yeah, it may be that the most exciting part of this election is actually after the election, trying to get a government together. Perhaps. Listen, we're going to leave it there for now. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in to join us this morning, Stephen, John and Brian. Now, the Labour Party in government is proposing to reduce class sizes to 20 at primary level and to reduce the pupil-teacher ratio at secondary level to 17:1. The party also said that it wouldn't rule anything in or out in relation to student fees. Well, our correspondent Emma O'Kelly was at the launch of the party's education policy this morning, and she joins us now from Limerick. Good morning, Emma. What more can you tell us of it?
Good morning, Keelan. Yes, some very popular measures announced by the Labour Party, as you said, reducing class size, things like abolishing all school transport costs, for example. But one thing I wanted to tease out of the party this morning was their attitude towards third level funding and in particular student fees. This will be a big issue facing any new government. Now, the party has pledged to initially reduce student fees by €500, but that's pending the publication of a major report that's due shortly. That report is expected to recommend a substantial increase in fees among a number of options and the introduction of a student loan system. So I wanted to find out what the Labour Party view on this measure or potential proposal was.
Labour is not. Labour is going to wait until we get that report, because that report will deserve.
At this stage on student fees and loans?
The position we have at this stage is that there shouldn't be barriers to access to higher education, or indeed to any other level of education. But we're not going to prejudge the outcome of the Cassels report.
So you're not ruling out?
We're not ruling anything either in or out. We want to have that debate, but I want to stress again that Labour will not have barriers to procedures and moving forward in education. And that's the basis of our position.
Keelan, that's one big issue facing a new government. Another big policy area is the issue of patronage and the dominance of the Catholic Church in our education system. Now, the Labour Party said this morning that it would repeal legislation which enables schools to discriminate against children of minority or no faiths when it comes to admission. Now, this would be a key issue for a substantial cohort of potential Labour Party voters.
Emma, thank you very much indeed for that. Now we're going to take a quick break. Afterwards, we'll be speaking to our political panel. You are very welcome back to the programme. Now for our political panel, I am joined this morning by Senator Paul Bradford of Renewa, a candidate for the party in Cork East, by Paul McAuliffe of Fianna Fáil, a candidate in Dublin North West, and by Kate O'Connell, Fine Gael candidate in Dublin Bay South. You're all very welcome. Thank you for coming in to us. I suppose we start really by taking a look back at the debate last night. The consensus this morning is that there was no clear winner, no clear loser, but it was a good night for the smaller parties in particular. Paul Bradford, I mean, Lucinda Creighton last night of your own party, the piece that most people are talking about is what she had to say around crime and the notion of holding parents accountable for their children's crimes. Can you just tell us how exactly that would work?
Well, firstly, in relation to last night's performance, if I could just agree with you that it was, a relatively good night for the smaller parties, and so it's an opportunity for the smaller groupings to get on the stage. As a representative of a small grouping, I suppose we're kind of climbing mountains, and we're doing so without the advantage of state funding. So I think there was that opportunity last night for the smaller parties, the newer parties, and their leaders to present themselves. I think did so effectively, and I suppose overall last night the debate was calm and civilised. So we'd all recognize that.
Specifically on that issue of crime,
in relation to one of the proposals which is in our manifesto. I mean, we have observed the breakdown of law and order across this country over the past 20, 30 years, particularly in our urban areas, particularly juvenile crime, and we see young offenders becoming adult criminals, and we must ask ourselves, what do we do to stop that? And clearly what we have been doing over the past number of decades simply hasn't worked. And
so just tell me exactly, what are you advocating? What is Renewa saying?
We're advocating that where there is a young offender or a juvenile offender, that as part of the process, his or her parents would be brought into the system, would work with the system, would be accountable and responsible to a reasonable level.
And how do you make them responsible? Are you talking about fining them, about locking them up? What are you doing to them?
I don't think you're talking about, in fact, you're obviously not talking about locking parents up, but you're trying to ensure that parents take some degree of control over their children.
I know, but I'm just trying to understand how. How do you do that? Well, because, I mean, the parents are in court. So I've been to the children's court. The parents are there.
If you look at our education system, we expect that the parents should play a role in their child's education. If a child is having a difficulty at school, it is expected that the parent will come in, sit down with the teachers, and hopefully be part of the solution. In relation to crime, we would wish to see the parent, being part of the answer, not part of the problem. There are cases, and you have reported on many of them yourself from the courts, where parents simply do not show up on the day.
Well, that's rare enough. I would have to say it's rare enough, and the judge will go looking for them. What's really common in the courts is to see parents who simply don't have the abilities. I mean, I have seen parents in court who I have seen 10 years previously as children in court. Yeah. They tend to be people who are not... They could do with a bit of support rather than a bit of admonition.
That's just a gimmick.
Therein, lies the case. You have seen parents who have been in the courts themselves as children. So what has happened up to now has not worked, and we must try to change the system. We must support
and encourage
parents.
But then to look to that parents and to suddenly get it together as a parent.
There are occasions where there must be a degree of parental responsibility, and that's what we're suggesting. And our starting point is that simply the practices up to now clearly are failing, because if they were working, we would not have the levels of crime and vandalism on our streets.
OK, well, Kate O'Connell, I mean, whether you agree with the methodology or not, it is a very true issue that there are cycles of children going through the courts who turn up again as parents, that it has not been tackled by this government.
Yeah, I really don't think, I mean, it's a good idea to be dragging parents into court that don't want to be there. I mean, I'm aware of the fact that I suppose parents are either going to engage in this situation or they're not. So they're either going to be there or not. So I'm not really sure by holding them accountable what you could achieve. What I think what this comes down to is the concept that every child born in this country starts off on an equal footing. And that comes from funding, I suppose, preschool education, getting children into the system at a young age and having them avail of all that can be given to them. And once they start then in primary school, that we have the resources there to deal with children that perhaps haven't the same advantages as maybe my children have.
So Kate, tell me, Renew have made it
root.
very clear what they're advocating to deal with this issue. What are Fine Gael advocating? What are you saying should be done?
What I'm saying should be done is...
What's in your manifesto rather than
what
I'm
you're saying is investing in preschool years so that we get children into the system, have them, I suppose, exposed to every opportunity. I even see it already, and my own lad has just started primary school, and I have 3 kids, that, you know, already that you see that he's doing chess on a Monday and he's doing whatever on a Tuesday and he's doing hurling on a Wednesday. So my children are exposed to all those good things. And I think it's very important that children start off on an equal footing. And we have, Fine Gael brought in the Children's Minister for Children, the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs, and we've, I suppose, spoken to 66,000 children to see their views on things. And I took part in the children's hustings the other day, and it was actually very interesting to see the input children can have into their own futures and the view they have of society already as children.
Paula Farrell, Fianna Fáil's reaction to that notion that it's actually it's parents that we should be getting them more involved in.
I have to say, listening to both Paul and Kate, I'm actually really angry. Like, what we don't need are gimmicks from Renew. Certainly last night there were new voices and different voices in the debate, but when you got down to the detail, sometimes that detail was lacking, and you can hear it clearly again this morning from Paul. What young people in disadvantaged areas need is early intervention and investment in education. And
Fianna Fáil didn't do that. You were in government for long.
I beg to differ. The school completion programme was brought in under Fianna Fáil, a fantastic programme which we will continue to deliver. Young Ballymun, one of the early initiatives that we have in our area, which really tackles from a very early age disadvantage and provides equality. Again, we only last month we found is being threatened by the current government that we won't have continued funding. And the reality is the public out there don't want to hear the empty promises about tax cuts. And both parties here on either side of me want to give tax breaks to those right at the top, and that won't be possible then to invest for those.
But you want to give tax breaks for people up to €80,000.
Yeah, so what we've made specific priorities, and our priorities are working families, older people, and then with the remainder of the money we want to invest them in public infrastructure. We don't want runaway tax cuts for those over 80,000 that Michael Noonan has suggested, and I think the flat tax would absolutely undermine, it would repeat the mistakes of the past. We can't undertax and overspend. That's what went wrong in the past, and we have to learn that lesson. We can't have action politics, and what we need to do is invest in the programmes that really need
it.
Yeah,
Paul, just explain to us how that flat tax could generate the finance that we need to run the country.
Well, firstly, can I say to you that the flat tax which you're proposing is a regime supported by 5 different reports, including 2 Commission of Taxation reports in this country.
OK, fair enough. Just tell us how it works.
Could I also just say that within the past 12 months, the Minister for Jobs, Richard Bruton, in my view, the most successful Minister of the government, commissioned a report looking at the future economic development of this country. One of its central recommendations was a flat tax. Now, how would it work?
OK, how does it work?
How does it work?
Tell me.
You do away with all reliefs and avoidance measures and exemptions, and every citizen pays 23% of their income. Now, for families at the lower end of the financial spectrum, there is a tax credit refund of $3,600 per household member. That ensures that people at the lower end of the spectrum are in no way disadvantaged. And on that $3,600, the 23% tax rate applies. We have to ask ourselves...
Well, is it not true that those at the top benefit most?
I think...
And isn't that what we've had from Fine Gael is 5 years of that? 5 budgets, the ESRI has said that they have given more to those at the top.
One voice at a time. Let Paul Farrell finish there.
If I may finish, I mean, listening to a lecture from Fianna Fáil about taxation policy, isn't going to excite me. All I know is that our taxation system over the past 25 or 30 years in this country, it has resulted in recession, recovery, recession, recovery, recession, recovery. Now, all the buzzword over the past month has been about recovery. But if we keep doing economics and taxation and politics the same way, we'll be back in the crisis.
Just a clear question here. Have you done your sums on this? Do you know how much money you will raise if you tax everybody at a flat rate?
Not only have we done our sums, but KPMG, who would not be deemed a second-rate company.
So you're saying you have the information and it'll work?
Have independently, not advised by us, commissioned a report and have suggested that the flat tax regime, as proposed by us, would actually enhance and increase taxation.
OK, we have your point. Kate O'Connell, your reaction to that from Fine Gael.
There is no progressive.
Hang on, Paul, let Kate speak.
There is no progressive economy in the world that has a flat tax.
Have you heard of Hong Kong? Have you heard of Singapore?
Paul, let Kate make her point.
They not progressive?
That is not true, Paul. Hong Kong brought it in, and then they brought in a second rate. You don't know your facts. All we need now is when the country's on the road to recovery, that we would have Renewa bring in some sort of economic experiment that would cost, and this is costed, it would cost 3.5 billion on day one to bring in that. And I have to agree with Paul McAuliffe on this one, that it would benefit the higher earners of the country the most, and it would penalise the poorer people and the medium earners.
But Kate, your own proposals are going to cost $4 billion. The Fine Gael proposals in USC are going to cost $4 billion.
USC was brought in as an emergency tax. I'm somebody that has essentially spent the best part of my working life in the recession in this country. And the USC was brought in, and I believed at the time, and I wasn't actively involved in politics at the time, I believed it was an emergency tax brought in by Fianna Fáil. But in fairness to Fianna Fáil, it was brought in to bring in revenue when the country was on its knees. Now, it was their own fault the country was on its knees, but the fact was it was brought in for that reason.
I need to bring Paul McAuliffe in here.
Create an environment.
Kate, we have your point.
The reality is, Kate, that the fiscal space that you have pictured and the spend that you've put forward is actually now the biggest risk to the Irish economy. You're going to effectively repeat the mistake of the past of giving...
Your mistakes of the past.
And we have learned from them, and isn't that the point? When you make a mistake, please learn from it. Don't repeat it 5 years later. You're going to go back to the people, try and sell them their own money back, and that the public don't want that. They want investment in...
But hang on a sec, I have a question for all of you here. Isn't it interesting that it seems to be the Social Democrats who are having the most positive movement in the polls at the moment, and they are proposing no tax reductions? Paul, does that disturb people with Renewa with your flat tax?
One must present what you feel is correct, the correct remedy for the country's economic ills. Now, could I just say in relation to USC, I have found it amusing when I've seen the Fine Gael policy, because a little over 12 months ago, in a debate in Shannon, I asked the Minister for Finance what his view was on USC. He put very firmly on the record that as far as he was concerned, it was a permanent tax. He disagreed with me that it had been introduced as an emergency measure, and he said it was central to his budgetary planning. Now, I'm glad that he has done an about turn, but it's not just USC or the other 15 or 16 rates of tax. We need a new tax system in this country.
A new tax system you're looking for. You're both offering reductions on USC. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for coming into us this morning.
Thank you.
Kate, Paul and Paul. Now, we turn to our constituency profiles. Clare's outgoing Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TDs are expected to hold on to their seats. But the fight is on for the fourth seat, with Labour's Michael McNamara under particular pressure from a local doctor and a raft of independents. There are more than 111,000 people living in this largely rural constituency, covering Ballyvaughan, Ennis and Shannon. The boundaries have been unchanged since the last election. There are 4 outgoing TDs here, all seeking re-election. The candidates, they're the outgoing TDs that you see there: Pat Breen, Joe Kerry, Timmy Dooley and Michael McNamara. And the candidates this time round are as follows. Pat Breen of Fine Gael. Richard Cahill, Independent. Joe Carey, Fine Gael. Timmy Dooley, Fianna Fáil. Andre Sibo Hakizimana, Independent. Michael Harty, Independent. Mary Howard, Fine Gael. Ian Lynch, Independent. Michael McDonough, Fianna Fáil. Michael McNamara of Labour. Claire Colleran Malloy of Fianna Fáil. Nolene Moran of Sinn Féin. Dermot Mulqueen, Independent. Anne Norton, Independent. Niamh O'Brien, Fís Nua. And finally, Fergal Smith of the Green Party.
The 4-seater Clare constituency, considered a marginal one where the 4 sitting TDs are rarely returned. A mixed constituency with a number of large towns, but mostly a rural and agricultural county. Shannon Airport, always an election issue, is doing well, as is tourism. But like most rural areas, the loss of services and lack of an economic dividend felt in the large cities are major issues in this election.
Where they're going to come a cropper is in rural Clare, which has been absolutely decimated by unemployment and immigration.
Ennis is the county capital. The majority of the population would be along the western corridor from Ennis down to Shannon. But west of Ennis, there are concerns over rural crime, decreasing number of Gardaí on the ground, and then the old Garda in the village. That was a practice that would be there for generations, but that isn't there anymore, and that would be a worry, and it seems to be coming up in the campaign.
Health has been a regular issue in Clare over the past number of general elections, and health is an issue once again, with the challenge from a rural GP. But can that challenge over 11 or 12 long counts for which Clare is known be sustained to the very last vote?
The big news, of course, is the introduction of GP Michael Harty into the race. He has been very, very active in medical issues, going back to the Ennis General Hospital issue. He's not an unknown quantity, and why people will be fearful, especially Michael McDonagh, who's in a very, very close parish in Miltown and even Pat Breen across in Ballinacally, that he would have a huge cohort of rural patients. He's certainly going to get several thousand votes, first preference votes, there's no question about that, and it depends then preferences after that, who goes back to the parties.
The fight, or the scrap, or the local scrap as people are calling it, could be for that fourth seat. Michael McNamara is the incumbent, did very well with the upsurge in Labour in the last election. Can he hold on? That's the big question.
That report from Catherine Halloran, our Midwest correspondent. Now, a key change in this election is that a gender quota rule has been introduced, meaning that parties have had a minimum of 30% of either gender on their candidate list. So how much of a difference has it made so far, and how many women will actually make it through to the next Dáil? For more on this, I'm joined now by former Fine Gael TD Alwyn Enright and by Suzanne Collins of the organisation Women for Election. Thank you both very much indeed for coming into us. Alwyn, I suppose we'll talk about your own personal story in just a moment, really, your own experiences. But first, Suzanne, where are we at now? It's a 30% rule. We've the final candidate lists. What are the figures?
That's right. So 163 women are going to contest this general election, and that's up from 86 in 2011.
So nearly doubled.
Almost to double, and double the percentage. So it was 15% of female candidates in 2011, and now it's 30%. So the gender quota for selection has proven to be really successful. All of the parties have met or exceeded the gender quota for selection, and independents and smaller groupings, it's also had a positive knock-on effect there, where women have also doubled their percentage in the amount that...
And I suppose, Suzanne, you could say, well, listen, they had to. You know, they were going to lose funding if they didn't get 30% women on their candidate selection. It's the next step that is really crucial. How many of those women have a realistic chance of making it through to the Dáil?
Well, I think that exact point was in the minds of the larger parties, because the four largest parties, 85% of their female candidates are either elected at local or national level or have run before. So these are proven campaigners. These women are proven vote getters. They've been blooded, essentially, on the campaign trail. So the parties knew that not only did they have to select women to meet the quota, but they also had to select women who had the potential to win seats.
And OK, so 85% of the women on the tickets have served before in some capacity. That would be the same for male candidates, would it?
Well, I think there's a high percentage as well of male candidates, and
so it's still, if you like, a level playing field.
It is, but
do you have predictions of how many of them have a realistic chance of getting a seat?
Well, we would like to see a 30% uplift in terms of women in the Dáil. There are a couple of factors in play. Incumbency is a big one, and also then there are several constituencies where there's a man and a woman woman on the ticket for a party with no incumbent. So there's this real potential. So let's say Dublin Bay North, for example, Sinn Féin are running a man and a woman. So Denise Mitchell, if Sinn Féin voters and supporters get behind her, could be the one to take that seat.
OK, so that is the next step, OK? So they're on the papers, now it's to get them into the Dáil. But Alwyn, you got into the Dáil, you came from a political family yourself. You voluntarily gave up that position. So I suppose the point is there is yet more work to be done to keep women in the Dáil if they make it in the first place. What was your own experience?
My experience of being in there was pretty much entirely positive, despite the fact that I left it. So I think I want to put that out there first. From my own situation, it was more, once I had children, I was serving a rural constituency in Laois Offaly, and it just became a choice. I felt very strongly that it was, you could go to Dublin, you could do the job, you were away from home for those nights, but you went home and the job still has to be done, so it's day and it's night. So in terms of the time commitment that was required, and I suppose I had, for the first more than half of my career, I've been full throttle as a politician. I didn't have those kind of commitments, and it just became something I just made the choice that it wasn't for me to try and do both, because I felt I couldn't do both properly. There are lots of women who make a different choice, and I fully support them in that. There are lots of rural TDs who have managed to do it, but I think the debate can be a little bit skewed sometimes, because it's like, the Dáil should be family friendly by sitting 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and that's lovely if you're a female in Dublin or a male in Dublin. Whereas for rural TDs, I think the compactedness of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would make a lot more sense. So I think there's issues there. I suppose there's a bigger picture that when we see how this works and when we see how many women get elected, there is a bigger picture as to how the system operates in general, and looking at what's done in other countries.
Would the idea be that once the proportion of women within the Dáil changes or increases, that will automatically change the way in which business is done in there? Make it more family friendly, more women friendly?
There would certainly be an impetus then for change. I mean, if we look at the Dáil at the moment, there's a high of 16% of women elected to the Dáil. So, to try and push through any changes, or to really even look at what would suit families, and it is families. I mean, it's not necessarily an issue just for female TDs. For I mean, Alwyn's husband has a young family and is a rural TD, and it does affect the wider family. So I think it's probably something that should be looked at. But certainly, I think if there was an increase in the proportion of women, then there might be an impetus to have a look at things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I always remember Olivia Mitchell saying that she went in after her children were more or less raised, that she couldn't have done it with young children.
Yeah, and that was
what
based in Dublin.
Yes, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Just
so
down the road.
There is. But I think, look, there's lots of careers that are like that, and I think there has to be a practicality in what can be achieved, because there isn't really a middle ground if you're in Dublin Bay South, or if you're in Cork South West. It's difficult to see what that is. So I don't think there is a sort of a perfect solution. But I think once women are going into it with their eyes wide open as to the demands of it, and are willing to make that choice, then the best to look to them, and hopefully,
and I suppose it provides the role models needed for younger women who may be considering it. Alwyn, you got in without a quota system. I have interviewed many female politicians in the past who were opposed to this quota system. Is that opposition still there? That feeling of, well, listen, I made it on my own, you devalue all female politicians if you introduce a quota?
I think the way it has been done has been a good way. In other words, the government haven't said to the public, you have to go out there and you have to elect women in each constituency. Through the way it's been done, they've given the choice. We're going to give the opportunity to those women to have their names in the ballot paper, and at the end of the day, it's up to the voting public to decide who they vote for. So I think that has been a better way of doing it. The very first time I was asked about this by a newspaper, I said I disagree. But when you look and then you realise, well, hang on, is anything ever going to change? If we do everything the way we always did, we're not going to get a different result.
And that is the evidence, Suzanne, isn't it? Without quotas, it doesn't change.
It doesn't change. It would have taken 250 years to achieve any sort of gender balance within our national parliament. And I mean, I think in terms of opposition to quotas, Mary O'Rourke has been one of the stalwarts in opposing quotas, and only this week she has said, because she's out there on the ground working with female candidates in Fianna Fáil, and has said very clearly that she sees potential TDs there, and potential TDs who would not have been on the ticket had it not been for the gender quota.
So she's beginning to
change her view on it. Changed her view.
And I know Lucinda Creighton in the past has been opposed to it too.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what her current views are. the other issue I think people talk about when they speak about increasing the gender balance within politics is that it will change the way in which debates are conducted. It will change the way in which the political world operates. I mean, last night we were watching 7 leaders on the television. 2 of them were women. Have you seen any evidence of a change in the way in which the world operates?
Well,
or do women go native once they go in?
No, I think we're in the midst of an election campaign which is naturally, competitive and probably a little adversarial. But I think in the aftermath of it, it's going to be really interesting. All around the country, I mean, we heard from Claire there, there's more women on posters, on leaflets, in the local papers, on regional radio, on shows like this. And it does change the tone and tenor of the debate. And I think for anyone watching, it's particularly for, young girls, young women, to kind of see women in leadership positions or on the airwaves having a voice, it's really important.
Even just seeing them on the posters. Finally, Alwyn, we have to ask you, your children are a little bit older now. Would you consider getting back into politics?
I live in Donegal now. I don't live in my constituency, so I can't see that as being something that would ever arise.
You're still very much involved, though, aren't you?
I am.
Your husband is in politics
for the last few weeks, yeah.
But no, you wouldn't run again yourself.
I don't think so, no.
OK, well, listen, thank you both very much indeed for coming into us this morning, Suzanne and Alwyn. Now, that is all that we have for you for today. We'll be back with you tomorrow at midday. Until then, from all of us here, goodbye.